Hello, everyone. Guys, thank you so much for joining me for this Bible study to kick off our 2021. I've been wanting to do this for ages and wanting to create a space where we can not just read the Bible together and not just read Bible studies or opinions or plans together, but actually go in deep and start to learn new things about the Bible together and create a community where we can all comment and teach one another. And I'm so glad that it's happening. I've chickened out a bit a few times, but it's 2021 and anything could happen this year. So I thought, why not go for it? So thank you so much for joining me. This is how it's going to work. Over the next 21 days, we are going to read through Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians. We're going to read one chapter a day. So right now, if you're watching this and you haven't read Galatians 1, go and do that. Pause me, go and read Galatians 1 and come back to this. But we're going to read one chapter a day. And then I'm going to ask you guys to share what you learned. I'm going to share something that I learned. I would love you to share what you learned, because I think that as with any good church activity, whether it's small groups, whether it's Sunday serving, it always feels better, works better, flows better when we're involved. So come and get involved. Please share your voice in the comments. Come and share what God is saying to you. But I'm just going to take a couple of minutes and share with you what God showed me in Galatians 1, a few of the standout moments. So first of all, let's look at the context. Who is this book written to? Why do they need this kind of instruction? This is a passionate outpouring of a preacher on fire. There's a famous reformer called Martin Luther who helped to transform some of the ways that the early church ran and helped to make the gospel accessible to many more people than had previously had access. And he was passionate about seeing people receive freedom and seeing people receive Christ in a personal and transforming way. And this was his favorite book of the Bible. It's a fiery book. The Apostle Paul is on it in this book. In fact, we're about to start and read through Galatians 1. And one of the things that marks this book out from all the other books that Paul wrote was that it doesn't start with thanksgiving or praise or prayers or blessings for the readers. It starts with challenge. It's straight in, direct and confrontational. And I think maybe that's what we all need to kickstart our 2021. But it's written to a group of people called the Gauls. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but many years before Jesus, so about 300 years before Jesus, there are a group of people called the Gauls who were Celts, who were settled in France. And these people kind of swept their way through Europe and into this part of the world. And they were mercenaries, basically. They were guns for hire. They were these wild, barbarian men and women who lived life on the road and who different rulers and governors could hire in order to come in and kind of be like an army for them. So this is the people group that Paul is writing to here. At their core of their culture, they're fighters, they're wild, they're untamed, and Paul is writing them a wild and untamed letter. But they've settled in this area of the world that we now know to be around Turkey and that kind of area. But they've settled there, and one of the rulers has had this grand plan of giving them some land that's off his land so he can kind of get rid of them, but it's a buffer between him and his enemies so that they'll have to go through these wild barbarians before they get to him, and it's a pretty good idea. So these guys have been settled there for just over 200 years at this point. And these, if you think about the fact that they're referred to as barbarians, they're mercenaries, they're fighters, wild people. Paul is addressing the fact that they have become Judaized, they've become Hellenized, it says. They've become people who are living under Jewish law. And Paul's writing this letter to confront something. He's writing this letter to say, you are not raised Jews. You are not born of Jewish line. Why are you living under the law? And this is going to become a bit of a theme for our first few chapters in this book. Why are you living under the law when you've heard so much about God's grace? Why are you trying to please Jewish lawmakers and Pharisees when I've told you about the fact that grace is over you and salvation comes through faith? So Paul writes this letter, but he starts with a bold introduction. He starts by introducing himself as an apostle chosen not by man, but by God. And he's writing to the churches in Galatia. So it's not just to one congregation, it's to a whole group of people. But he goes straight in verse 6 by saying, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and turning to a different gospel. He is furious. Paul at this point is not a happy chappy. He's heard about these men and women who he's been sharing the truth of Jesus with, and he's heard about the fact that they are coming under or trying to mold their lives around Judaism and a Jewish law that Paul is communicating to them is now past. They're now freed from. But he's challenging them and confronting them in their ease in which they believe a new gospel, false teaching, false doctrine. And I think that this is relevant to all of us, right? Where we can so easily know about the grace of God. We can know that we're free. We can know that Jesus has paid the price for us. And yet we still want to be law-abiding, rule-following, submissive people who kind of follow the norm or follow what's expected of us. These wild men have become tamed, not by the love of God or the grace of God, but by the pressure to follow the rules of the Jewish people around them. So Paul's delivering them a pretty strong challenge. And I just love in verse 10, it says, am I seeking the approval of man or of God? Here's a lifelong question that we all need to be asking ourselves. Am I trying to be popular or am I trying to be faithful? This is something that I have to test myself in all the time. Am I trying to be popular or am I trying to be faithful? If I were trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. I love the fact here that Paul reminds us that servanthood, serving, it's not a hobby. It's not a Sunday activity. It's a new identity. And he takes on the identity of servant of Christ when he steps into this role of challenging and teaching the people who are following. But we then have this outline of how he was called and the fact that none of it was his choice. He wasn't out looking for some new truth or revelation. God undeniably called him and stopped him in his tracks. Before God called him, we see a lot of personal language used by Paul. I persecuted the church. I tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism. I was extremely zealous. Pre-gospel, it was all about Paul's actions. But post-gospel, the narrative changes. He says, it was he who set me apart. It was he who called me by his grace. He was pleased to reveal his son to me. Post-gospel, it becomes all about God's actions. And that's a challenge to me. How much am I trying to measure my success or my faithfulness by my own actions? And how much am I reminding myself that it's about God, what God is doing in me, through me, and with me to impact others? That's challenging. So in Galatians 1, we really have this bold introduction to Paul. He is introducing himself not arrogantly, but with authority to teach and to correct these guys, because he knows that there's freedom on the other side of his challenge. There's freedom for them if they would only understand that he's not trying to be some leader. He's not looking for notoriety or fame. He's looking to be a faithful deliverer of the message of Christ. So I would love to hear what God is teaching you through Galatians 1. I would also love for you to just jump in the comments today and say who you are, where you're from, where you're joining us from, and anything that God spoke to you in this first part of Galatians. And then we'll be back here tomorrow for Galatians 2.